some of the topics. A lot of you have asked the same types of questions, so we don't hear word for word. Hopefully you get your question and answer anyway. So, same format as before. We'll give them 2 minutes to respond with the rebuttals. We'll refresh the whole rebuttal process. You got to get 5. So it's a half hour. When the half hour is done, we're done. Or when the cards that we've chosen are done, we've got about 10 or 12 questions here, so we'll get right to it. Well, let's see. We had Dara, you went first the first time around, so let's let Doug go first this time around. First question up for grabs here is, of the big 3, education, welfare, and the military, which would you reduce most heavily, and what effect would that have on the people?
I think we've already addressed some of that. Education is not a function of the federal government. So right there, that has to be massively scaled back. Will it have an effect on the people of the country? Certainly it will. Because I don't think anybody here thinks that the federal government is going to scale back the Department of Education and give us back the money that was going to it. So what we need to do is we need to pass legislation that limits income taxes, at least to the extent that we're getting rid of the Department of Education or the functions that were in education. Welfare we need to address, obviously. We are becoming a dependency society where the government is our mother from birth to death, and we've got to stop that. Welfare isn't a specific program that we would need to address. We need to address all of the programs together that are our entitlement programs. We spend more money on our entitlement programs than on the entire rest of the government, and we've got to scale that back. So the answer, education.
Thank you.
I think I'm going to get this down by the end of the night. There's a lot that we need to do. Obviously in education, I would agree that it needs to go back to the local level. And I think all of us know that when you send $1 to Washington, $1 doesn't come back to Connecticut. That's a no-brainer. I think in the area of welfare, there's a lot of different things that I could say. I'll just give you one example, and I think we need to look at a lot of these programs coming out of the government. Do you know that when a union fails to be able to meet retirement pay for union members, that you and I pay for that, up to $12,000 some a year? And now there's a bill before Congress that they're talking about making this an unlimited amount. Our tax dollars paying for unions that fail to set aside enough money. And what we're seeing is that it's a great benefit, a welfare program, if you will, for union workers, because now we're seeing when unions have, in some cases, up to 12 people on retirement for one active union member putting money in, that these unions, in essence, their programs for retirement are doomed to failure. And now they are talking about you and I worked several jobs to get through school. I worked all my life. I was a volunteer firefighter. I worked in my community. I don't have that kind of savings and money to go out there to afford to pay for other people to retire. This is welfare. Whether it's corporate welfare or union welfare, the government should not be involved in this, and we need to cut back. If we take money out of education and put it back at the local level, can you imagine what we could do? Earmarks, just take earmarks alone, $20 billion in earmarks. Can you imagine if we didn't have to pay that in taxes and we just took that and put it into our educational systems at home? We would be doing fine. What we need to do is stop sending it to D.C. and then accepting a small percentage back and put more people to work in the private sector, and we will stop some of this welfare.
Dara, you're up first here. What are your thoughts on cleaning up corrupt alliances between government and giant corporations, subsidies, prejudice statutes, mandates, lobbyists, unequal applied injustices, and the like? What are your thoughts on that?
Yes. I think you gave me quite a list there. You know, when anything gets out of control, it needs to be brought back to the center. And I think that's what's happened with everything in Washington these days, everything on your list there. What we need to do is to bring some sanity back to Washington, just decent government, that hardworking people can come and say, I am proud to be an American and to contribute. When you have excesses in any area, you need to be careful. And I think that's what's happened here, where we're seeing that corporations have gone overboard in the financial sector, in the banking sector, and what happens? When something goes wrong, this administration's answer is to have the government take it over. I don't think having government taking over these programs is the answer. In the financial industry, when you look at banks, what percentage of our banks are owned today by the government? Too many. We need to find ways to allow companies to restructure, to not put the FDIC in charge of large bank or financial institutions when they're having problems, but we need to create a new bankruptcy code which will secure these companies in the sense that they will be able to fail or to restructure without risking the entire economy. And there are ways that we can do this. What's happening now is not working, and we need a change.
The question talked a bit about corporations having an unholy alliance of some sort with government. And one of the things that we need to remember is all of the sort of quasi-governmental corporations, your Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, things like that, which right there, that is it a corporation? Is it part of the government? Or is it a corporation that's supported by the government? So does it act like the government, or does it act like a corporation? Most people don't know. Most people in Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac don't know. Most people in the government don't know. What we need is we need the private sector to be private, the public sector to be public, and we need to be very, very careful about when we try to meld those together. Because when you start melding the government and corporations together, you get essentially fascism. And we want to stay as far away from that as possible. Now, obviously there's a lot of corruption, both in the private sector and the public sector. But when the private sector has corruption, we've got the public sector to crack down on it. Who cracks down on the corruption when it's in the public sector? Nobody. So what we need is a clean division. We need to get rid of corporations like Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, and we need to have sensible oversight of corporations. We need to enforce our antitrust laws so corporations do not get too big to fail. And we need to have a system of oversight in place for both the public sector and the private sector that work efficiently.